Untitled Chapter, cutting some Tukitani comes on Chiji Jabo, Dingme to the Chiji Dayang Para, Zombie Doro Chamame, Balam Govera, the Gozon Kubachi Begone, so I'm talking Jobs Geo, Giovanni Sero Tamjid. Toksewa Chimbegoni Jesus, someone said, so Congress on Tabi gets on the Minanda, Sebes, send the Saban Rubin, make it to your Tuginama, Nature and Dickens, some your Conchabi, Tong, Makabi Shabi. The Hindali in Sora, John, Jensolan, Beme, Dombater, Devin number Rajan, the turns, and Opetayan, that Sombarbe, Pemom June, Edale, Penso, Omichuji, Japodone, to some subject, Kundungo 1 year, Tonson Jugung on the Tabila Michalas. Dasun Revilona, Chila Jerokanda, Sukatonga, the Helona Javakan, Sada, in the Tembichi, Chambana, and Yammer the Bata, and the Shishi, like it up, than the Jinki. Trom Dada Mayakanam Janrawakun Jedrake, Jineba, Tamje, the Chun, the two Jur. That's Anita Tahidwala Nyam Yonang in Samala.
First, I just would like to welcome everyone joining us here tonight with the Tashi Dele.
Ani data di shola tatari di montana train Vietnam city ha leak montana segmare ta bida gatina. Pe shuji tachi bodo chaso.
And just as an aside here, the weather today in Montana at the Buddha Garden was so beautiful, so pleasant.
So pleasant. Pleasant is in the Karela.
Pleasant in the keyboard.
Aha. Entering that Nimaya pe trombondo, Taya ji. Re gang matuji gang dia mevacha.
It was warm in the sun and all the snow melted except up on the tops of the mountains.
Ani some say going a carina that some dawajire.
So these days, these days I'm in somewhat of a retreat, but I look out the window and I want to go up in the mountains.
That's it. Yeah, I need in this Janita. Oh, Cassetta, Tari. And then I get Dinipa, Tati Chuchi Shete, and it's a number Sanji. And then Tangy number Nye, Chepala Tencheni. And it's Rainanda, Yenanda. Also, Tatan Kova said there, Gangang, Pumpo chicken on Lolata, Lu, Sem Chatan, Gangan chicken on the Tama. Ni begin any something to get at so, and it donganly drove it Toki Nangu Samba, and it's Samba to the Toki Bata Kite, December.
So I encourage you to listen to these teachings with the intention that, with all of the power or virtue of me here explaining these teachings and you all there listening to these teachings and us coming together to do this teaching and listening to this Dharma teaching, that I encourage you to do this with the intention that that can become a method for liberating, whether you think of it as yourself or others. All of us are in this state that we refer to as samsara, and samsara is what we say is like a heap of suffering. And so our bodies and our minds, our physical and mental experiences, are one of dissatisfaction, one of suffering. And so may this teaching, my teaching and your listening, become, a method or a cause for the liberation from that suffering for ourselves and for others. And so listen with that intention, which is the specific intention of bodhicitta for this teaching. Bless.
I'm also tended to tend the top again, Kobe Gangan deleta, Dogma Tabaina young. Then Nico Coranting as a Susugi Semban digitola, Re Semban digitola, Zupon digitola, and in also Ganga, the margin traded in the Yeta de Solaging as a Donland Chegudwa. And it tended to get Donland Tots on Chichumba in a young. Then also Muniji Pembo Yabata,
And even if we're not able to completely reverse this process of samsara, then at least in the immediate circumstance, it will lead us to be able to be able to face and deal with all the various kinds of difficulties that we experience, both physically and mentally. I think anyone who is a practitioner, anyone who's putting these teachings into practice understands the benefit we can get from that.
Yung bị tận đa de anh mới hiện đại de là phàm nguni để phèn thu sa de sam ba chi chong na de hiện đại là phèn ta ya chi che gi yin sam bi ge go ni anh sempre.
And then, for myself, for example, here teaching these things this evening, doing this not with any wish to increase my notoriety or gain some kind of power or status, but just in between my practice sessions here in my retreat, I'm just giving this teaching with the hope that this could be beneficial to some other people. And so I would like, you all to keep that in mind and also have that similar intention that joining here in this teaching, that you're going to do this, that if these teachings become something that you find would be helpful, that you're going to implement them in order to help others.
Ane tangi tari ma chi hianda telaya ta chetang ge tes chi yong thakpa da wu chi chan ru mendo da wu chi transong te ina chi ga se ta nga so nyamle nangen chore ane chi yang dene di yong de so la te se chi konyong tu sam ye dinge ane ti ta de so la te se chi pen de re ni Ani ngeke tata di dene chetang de ta chanchon chuku chis cha dun de ani dinta re dawari la ta ditha re ya gi yore ta tinde chi gi nanglo na ya chi gopsha da jap chi ni de du cham da wo chi shuna ani na samne de tinde chi ni zu ya bai.
And so what we're going to talk about is quite a difficult topic, quite a difficult, text or subject. But I think for people who are practicing or people who have some level of understanding, realization, and experience of these Dharma teachings, I was, hoping that it might be helpful for some of those people. And so the topic is going to be the 37 Factors of Enlightenment, which I'm breaking up over the course of some, 1 weekend per month to go through in brief all of those subtopics within the 37 Factors.
Ani ta chetang ge chi pe ta chanchon chu gu chu sim chi cha den bo de ani chanchon sim ba nam je lam la jarang du tene lam ne tang bo cholam ni ani julam jun tha ga pa de la tene jun thama ga pa la ani ko ka se gombi ge tene semba da wo ji ya de chen da wo ji che chi ni tene chi ni ya nang yo res.
And just generally speaking, these 37 Factors of Enlightenment, when we take these and we apply them to the path of practice of the Bodhisattva, then these are practices which are implemented starting on the path of accumulation and continuing all the way through to the final moment, which is the last moment on the path of joining.
Ani ta nga so chi dwala ta she yo mari pen nge she sala ta kha hi chi nguni chanchu simba de Yes, Sigpare. Ani Kashi Yang Lama Shupa Tende, and it's a tongue called the Society of the Yes, Sigpare. A Kache, Kahan Inayanda, Chipayo Mare, and also D. Tata Trembany ya yella sopa tindrige any castle gombi nyamne to get that so any naso ramba in the chick checky or lama chupa inanda lamna shume inanda then chick ramba in tesora than yamne monkey ores.
And as for, the audience to whom I'm speaking to, I don't know, it's possible that there are some of you out there who are bodhisattvas, some who maybe have not even entered into the path of practice, who are just ordinary beings who haven't entered into the regular or into the path of practice, but it doesn't really matter either way. These 4 applications of mindfulness are, stages of meditation, stages of practice, and all these 37 factors included in the starting from the four applications of mindfulness are all like these stages of practice of meditation that many of us, that most of us are already practicing.
God said take the song at what day Pagi Yondan Zonula, count the Tony Ninji ni Julatemba, Solum Chase. Kachen, dot this one, Tony ta Ninji, Nipo te, and Kaza Kanya Romachi Nyamneche, and it take the Castle Jula, and the Castle in Jobachi zone to Gala. Tela and it's Solum said,
So there's a quote from the Treasury of Precious Qualities that says that whoever, whatever person has combined the understandings of emptiness and compassion in their mind, then that person is on the path of accumulation.
And it is on Tata Ding, so the Trembanya Yasenanda, the Yeta so. Lama Hupi Kanza che Gayang, then the so Yamne Chekiore, Tata Kunchen Chuji Jabu Gepagi, and Tata de Dignalo La Caseta, Tanga main Jendo Dala, Tribin Tarmuchin inside, Tribin Tarmuchin, Tramtanzo, the so Nonola. Ani naso tata lama hubi kanza chegi chang ani chik pongni da ninje da tremba nye yala so bandu so tamki gomni ani tini ani cholam na tani jorgu re seni cholam go ngona yang so tamki tipa che samba che gomba che o tindres che ni song yore.
But then also the great omniscient king of Dharma Longchen Rabjam in the precious treasury of philosophical systems says that even one who has not entered into any of those 5 paths can also practice the four applications of mindfulness, emptiness, compassion, and so forth. And those are the practices by which, through hearing, contemplation, and meditation, with those practices, they will enter into the path of accumulation.
That's it. Ta kache tende steni tene nyamne che undukala anga so tik lam la mayo pi kanza chi yimba ina yang ane rempi tik tata di kasere ta indi tremba nyega yela ta nywa than senanda raba nywa thamba yang na kunzo sancho je semrambuche ane kima 마잉바치 줄에 깨운 것 되나 아니 가서 속이 람세네 파체 다 가서 니가 되는지 야야는 그래서.
And so like these practices, if we were someone who had not entered into a path and practicing these in steps, then we could say like to enter into the path, like the level at which we would say you have entered onto what's called the path of accumulation would be the point where you have gained experience of the four applications of mindfulness, or when you have in your mind stream generated a authentic, uncontrived sense of what we call conventional bodhicitta.
That's it. And then so here on the days, Kokala Kapondo, Chakduate, Chitang the Sogi Lam singing that Sada Lam said, dear danger. On to kill Jacob Yore. Then round la ta kick pena tanto to go choose him to start doing send and Sameg any lamla tambo jubi kap tena ani cholam se yanayan dikiyore.
And so when we talk like this is a little bit difficult to understand, isn't it? So, you'll often hear discussions in Buddhist philosophy about what we call the Bodhisattva levels or Bodhisattva bhumis, and then the Bodhisattva paths or the 5 paths. So that's what we're talking about. When we say a Bodhisattva level or Bodhisattva bhumi or a path, we're talking about actually a level of realization, like a level of mind or level of realization. And so when you have first generated in your mind what we call an uncontaminated path, a pure path or an uncontaminated path of practice, then that is what's referred to as the path of accumulation.
Let's say, ani da doddu sonaji kunchen chemboge da susugi jula ani kunzo chanchob semchima mai baji jule jibi kaptena ani cholam tangbo ndawochi yayo bare ani da dini da ngaso guten ndawochi sam tanggo des
The Longchen Abjam Gire.
Hola.
And so the omniscient king of Dharma, Longchen Abjam, says also that we have entered into there are different levels of the path of accumulation as well. So the first stage of the path of accumulation can also be talked about from Longchenpa's perspective as the moment that you have generated the authentic or unfabricated mind of bodhicitta, the conventional bodhicitta.
Ani yang kashi ji ginanglo la garisong yursena ta bena changchong chugu chisum tsa dung no ne tremba nyaya yela ani ki nywa thamba ini nywa thamba dang ani changchong simba le tangbo wa raba changchong simba le tangbo wa nywa thamba da ta dita de so phache ta chulam ngo tangbo ni ta alangi hiza ji chene ya sare da
Yes.
ta rang jula karse ango di temba never yaba yata temba never yaba yala nywa jongze zamtene nywa thamba tang ane kaba trame somge ngo tsuba ta kaba trame som sangji gire sebra sangji de dene ngo tsuba ane 장초 생게다 말에 dene 장초 심바 le tangbo wa ta deta de so dene jikba yimba tende songcha.
So then another way of talking about that in some other texts is that these 37 factors of enlightenment, so it's like when the first set of those 37 factors of enlightenment are the 4 applications of mindfulness. So it is you enter the path of accumulation when any of these things are synonymous. So when you enter into, or when you gain a little bit of experience of the 4 applications of mindfulness, or you could say that same point is when you become a bodhisattva, when you become a beginner bodhisattva, or you can say that when at the first moment of your 3 incalculable eons. So that's a little bit complicated, but they say that it takes 3 incalculable eons of gathering the accumulations to attain Buddhahood. So a person who has just entered the path of accumulations is in the first moment of their 3 incalculable eons to Buddhahood. They are also could be called a beginner bodhisattva, or the level at what that is, or at what that person's mind is at gaining a bit of experience of the 4 applications of mindfulness. Let's
a little difficult. La se ta kachen ngaso chi thikpa thimung ta de chini dolo ta de hi onde ani kaba drame songun jola sanji chomden di sanji yore sere ta de ngo tsuksa de chulom ne ya tsupa yin se chulom ne ya tangka de drang chini ani sanji jig ba de lo tindis chini tangka de ta pecha di ta parchian on de ya ya ba.
So in most texts, they say that like the Buddha attained Buddhahood after 3 incalculable eons of gaining or of gathering these accumulations, or and so it is at the beginning of the path of accumulation where that counting of the 3 incalculable eons starts.
La se any de shidikala na da te chidita nge tata shechil tanguni chi ngaso dbala ya ta lama shupi kanza ina nda ane lam shupi kansa ina da gachen ane di tremba nyewer japa yeni zonde tene tanchon chuku chusim tsadum put yeta teso gom ni ane nyamse lembi gitene tamadwala tachi sangji senanda kowane dror senanda on tendes jinita ngaso yagu yores.
And so, anyway, regardless of whether you are one who has not yet entered into these bodhisattva paths or one who has already entered these bodhisattva paths, you will be starting by practicing these 37 factors of enlightenment and gradually going through all of these 4 applications of mindfulness and the rest of the 37 factors and practicing them. And then finally and ultimately, you will attain Buddhahood and be liberated from samsara.
Anita, desonta ta ne dwal mambu hiedena ngaso tisyo de yang tolando gre. Ta ne dinima anita temba nyeba yaba yeti kote maji hugins.
So if I talk a lot about that topic, I think it's a bit of a waste of time. So I'm just going to get directly into the main topic of these 4 applications of mindfulness.
Let's say anita temba nyeba yaba yesedi lu temba nyeba yaba. Sorba temba nyeba yaba. Sem temba nyeba yaba. Chu temba nyeba yaba se.
And so the 4 applications of mindfulness are the application of mindfulness of the body, the application of mindfulness of feelings, the application of mindfulness of the mind, and the application of mindfulness of phenomena.
Semjong da la soba ga ji ka sere di chu yen da da te sam shu na de do ta ngi din ma he ong ba ka chen da den la de ni mi pi yon ro bo zo de te ya gu yo de.
And so it's pretty simple, right? Pretty easy. So you start by mindfully applying mindfulness on your own body, on your own feelings, on your own mind. And then phenomena here means anything other than that. But I'll get into a better explanation of what that means when we come to that point.
Let's say, yeah.
And so those 4 topics are the 4 objects which you are focusing upon in the examination or the meditation.
Let's say, and da dig nanola ya tremba da nyeya sen yorda. Da tremba nyeya se di zo kari ya or se na da jango mohon mochege. Then tremba dan songden je then hirap seni tendriyang songdo tremba dan songden gi hirap tel yagdo.
And so there are 2 terms which are making up this application of mindfulness. So there's the application and there's the word mindfulness. And so the way that Jamgon Mipam Rinpoche explains this is that you have mindfulness which is together with or which is endowed with wisdom, or a better translation that we've been using more for this word wisdom, jhana, prajna is sublime intelligence or even just intelligence. So anyway, it's mindfulness combined with that.
Da ki deyang pa ko devo da wodi hiena ane hirab ge jun tremba ge samba chigla ko nan rek di yodes.
And I think maybe an easier way to understand that would be that you have this intelligence, this discriminating or discerning intelligence, and a mindfulness which is helping to sustain the continuity of that wisdom or that intelligence.
Ta 가르레시디 당보 히럽되게 아니 르 설샘 취다 끼비게 니록된 통 통비게 토라 아니 템바 마인 바지니 준짱운드깔라 아니 템발라 녀버 약바세 아니 든디스 코나 디그도스.
And so first, with this intelligence, this sublime intelligence, then you see the true reality or the true nature of your body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And then with mindfulness, sustain the awareness or sustain the continuity of that intelligence. And so that's how we should understand this term, application of mindfulness.
Oh, let's say that they call sabores one. Ta tambo nilo de lutus hem the number yig maybe your yete get nilo kitaba in the tong be tola and tremba jun tendo do and the garang silat crembanya yas.
So it's quite simple, right? First, we see the real reality or the real nature of these four objects. So these are the four focal objects of our practices, which are going to be the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And then in that seeing of our wisdom or intelligence, then we have mindfulness, which is helping us to stabilize or sustain that continuity of that vision of our intelligence or wisdom of those four objects.
Okay. Yeah, Ani ta digin nalo lata tremba dela deni ja yanan digreba ke yanan digreba kari chini tremba nyeba yaba yeseni di ye yagubi jimsen di kari sena.
And so, we could have 100 applications of mindfulness or just one application of mindfulness. So what's the point in making it 4?
Ta di chetang gen do no ni song ya yore te ina ta o ka se de di ta di ta da just ta che ombo zambang gombo teni song ba na yin jini jang go mo han mo che gi teni khen jo gu no na di ye tham ba ya re ta di teni di ga re na ta zo ye de yin di ka la teni yeng ni ba re teni nge te man de hit ja gu yi se.
The Chigang go to my son like him.
Nasa ore tangi tambu dini ma yede ma he ane di yendal dene gasarela temene ko chado ta kaseri lu temba nye ya se undi tene lu de ya gub jimsen de tene nenge leng ji zo wo song ta kenju ma hwang nenge leng ji zo wo song de ta nenge leng ji zo wo se undi pena ta ta nga so dunga nyung sa ge ten maumba dunga nyung ze ge ta ti zo sa ge ta o kasere chi zosa gada pa kaseo ko chi jenda wo chadu da ti chi on du lu de ya ba da da dunga nga so dikala nyung yore maung ban dikala nyung sa gada ko de le zo hor ba ti chi on du de lu de ya ba de.
And so the reason for these 4 is it's also talked about in the sutras, but I'm going to be talking about it from the perspective of Mipam Rinpoche's gateway to wisdom, or gateway to knowledge, and he's taking his perspective or his presentation from some of the texts of Maitreya. And so the reason why we would do this close application of mindfulness on the body is because our body is the kind of primary cause of our future experience of suffering and our current suffering. And so it is in this body which we experience suffering in this life, and it is primarily this body which creates the karma which will lead us to suffer again in the future lives.
Yeah. Ani ta nipa de la chorba de tene sebi yese. Ta ngaso de chorba de mena ani ngaso de seba de ta chakba de jesa yo ma ta. Ti chung de seba ge yenda wo ji songza ani chorba de ya ba de ta. Ta ko de dog. Uni kita ti seba chakba ji ong sa de. Indu ti yeg zo indu tene chorba de ya ba de.
And then secondly, the application of mindfulness on feeling is presented because it is the primary foundation upon which or ground upon which we have grasping or attachment. And so whether that is attachment towards, feelings of goodness or suffering or badness, that it is on the basis of those feelings of like and dislike and so forth that we primarily experience attachment.
아니 다 same day 다 다데 전사가 여쭤오라고 돼 샘야니 이제 온데 아니 샘 때문에 야스 가서 거기 문이 나 세츠 종사라고 돼 근데 타마데 가서 찍하기 샘게 땡땡라다 파토도도 어디지 온데 디제데.
And so then our mind is presented because it is the fundamental basis or ground which we apprehend as ourself. Like when we really investigate and look deeper and deeper, it's what we're going to think is me or I. is the mind.
아니 추데 땅아서지 땅 코와다 냥디세니지 남야더오지 다지 야도 장에더오지 체용사기 yen더오데 추지 파 야니 아니 델란데 데니지 냥디데 데 코와데세니 데 남야도서 참아 야마 체데사데 추기 때는 용구요래 바디 추기 때는 용구요래 데 예지비 짐살라 때니 아니 추세.
And then phenomena is the general category that encapsulates all things of samsara and nirvana, and where we can distinguish like good from bad, samsara from nirvana, and so forth. And so that is the fourth.
Let's say ta kachen di ko ta di da ko chi mixa senanda yes senanda ten senanda ko chi tsava senanda di number yete then pangwa segonanda di ye ane ka sere di ye hindu kala di dene di chedela ane di nonata temba nyawa yaba ye se o ta tela temba cheni ane gomje pong yete tende cheni sombares
Di pangwa se wala.
Oh, that the pangwa senanda kido dako deso gudi tata ningele deso pangwa senanda deso gu tongwa senanda kachen chi 통신 시바 내는 방와 세난다 가르세나다 같이 대기에 되니 체들라 다 방도 주야 체들라 다 대야 왔다 되니 여세 다 된데 쏘는 되기도라.
Okay, and so with these four, which we could say are ground, or we could say they are the supports, or they are the roots of all of our grasping and suffering and so forth. It is in order for us to understand and see and realize, the reality of those things. And by thoroughly understanding and realizing the reality of those things, then we can abandon, for example, like the body as being the source of our experience and creation of future suffering, or our current experience of suffering and so forth.
Oh, let's say, ane ta this hunza ta theatra deso tene gombar chepala ane tangbo dig nilo kanyin bati shipazo ane shipige jun la tene tremba tempozo tenis chegures.
And so in order to meditate on these four factors, or these four applications of mindfulness, first we need to gain an understanding of the reality of those, or the true reality of those four factors. And then we need to stabilize our mindfulness on the continuum, or the continuity of that intelligence which sees that reality.
Let's say, ta tendis hongzang kala ta di yig ta di yibo de ta higore singe larwa ta hitong kandis kini higore sena tambo ani ngaso ludel he tene chorwal he tene semla he ani chula ma jan hegis.
And so I told you need to know the reality of these things. So how do we do that? And they need to be explained. So first we go one by one. First we're going to explain and understand the reality of the body, and then the feelings, and then the mind, and then phenomena.
Oh, let's say, ani tende sonta da di tene gomsor de la ta chetang ge na ye tipikapsala gomtong yore sancho sipikapsala gomtong yore doji tipikapsala gomtong yore te ina tada ngaso ta di cher sancho simpik tene gomtong ta de cheni tene ma hegi yes.
So generally speaking, there is a way of practicing these four applications of mindfulness in the foundational vehicle, or the foundational approach of Buddhism, as well as in the Bodhisattva approach, as well as in the Vajrayana approach. But we're going to stick with the presentation from the Bodhisattva approach or the Bodhisattva level or approach of Buddhist teachings.
Ane deyang dada di ta ngaso ta ningma ta penanga chi nimi lo ta de chini ta ma yu yagi ta chetang ko chi da re ta nimi lo ta de chini ma hu deyang de tribin tar mo chin zo tram tan zo gu no gom dong ji ma song ya do he ene ma he yagi ins.
And so I'm going to be talking about this from the perspective of the Nyingma tradition. This is one of the 4 Buddhist traditions of Tibet. And in particular, the way of meditating, which is contained within the precious treasury of philosophical systems of Longchen Rabjang.
Ani tadi longchen ba di gom tong de chetang ge da chi ye thipa dang chancho sba ni ka chi nyam de jar yang so da de do. Ani tendres chen ma ta hyu ya gos.
And also Longchenpa's explanation in this text kind of combines a little bit of the foundational teachings with the Bodhisattva level teachings.
Tan dor di sona pena ludela tada nyam ya de namkha tar gom hin se ji thab de matsang ba de jimala so ba gom se de song yan do kun chen chen bong.
Like, for example, he says that when in your main meditation period, in your meditative equipoise, you meditate on the body as like the nature of space. And in your post-meditation, ordinary day-to-day life, you should see the body as being dirty or illusion-like.
Sota trase dama yin dana riba chama yin se ni ka chen chi so su ge pe hirab ge den sang cha nombo da wo te chi zubu yong zo pa nga so ta chi hirab de ge den che ni ani di nang lo le pa ta ni on du ka la ni nga so pan sam je le chi lu se chi re ma do chi ge nguni chi lu se de hing bo do chi do du do chi cha raung yang do chi ta phagi ge nang hing do chi ta ne raung ji me ba 탐치 지진 때문에 somchi di go ni lus nang dewa mato phagila teri ningbo raji me bata tendri ges cheni pa ta ka ser tela phabni tela phabi de tene tongni se sharong ba kang ba de ani nyam ya gom je se ta tendri ji huna.
And so when we talk about what that means to meditate on your body like space in the meditative equipoise, the actual way of meditating on that is talked about in the wisdom chapter of the way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhacharya Avatara, where he says like your teeth and your hair are not yourself, your arms and your legs are not yourself, and so forth. So basically what there is saying is that you use this this sublime intelligence, this discriminating intelligence, to go very sharply through and examine your whole body, trying to find something that is the body. And when you examine, you're going through, and at a certain point, this examination gets you to the point where you never find any solid and like singularly existing body, but all that there is a collection or a coming together of causes and conditions and a mere appearance, a mere interdependent appearance of this coming together in causes and conditions, but there is no essential solid thing called a body. And so that is that examination that leads us to what we call emptiness. So there's like, when you get to that point, you have established that, you've done the analysis to the point that you have established that reality for yourself, then that is the moment of the appearance of emptiness or the arising of emptiness. And that is then the object of the meditation. You get to the point where that emptiness arises, and then you apply yourself in the meditative equipoise in that.
And then Jangwa Mohon Muchila, Kegong Koloma Sejora. And it data that data the Jenny Pachi Gona, Muni Susugeda, Pagi Luke, that Nilo Tatu be turned over the Tambo Shibache, Shini, Tony's Tombi June de la Niundu, and then also turned them there, then it looked at Manuel Yabasa.
Or also there's a way of meditating in Mipam Rinpoche's Wheel of Analytic Meditation, in which first you come to an understanding, like an intellectual understanding of the ultimate reality of the body. And then once you have understood that, then you just, rest your awareness in the vision of that reality or of that truth.
That's it. And Jithab de that dinona pen Matsangba Suba song. That Matsangba Suba song de Ani Cher Nasun Jikena Yons Trapi Ani zangda, mazang se jing aso nin yad hiyore, wala. Ikta di je ondu kala ta ngaso gdi mazang ba semb nola yo soma di yetate so, ani ngaso lule yo deki yorda. Ina ya ngaso namju den tongku me rwa. Namju tongku me. Nguni ge demba da woje sam patana ngaso la di mazang ba de ngaso yore de kunta da zu ya ju ji mare. Ngaso gu mazang ba de ba de ngaso ten le yore. Ani den tongwi choji goni e tola den di nyamri ya wa ten des.
La.
Da mazang ba tongwa la den tongtuk de nyamri ya wa.
Nyambar shagor bela di chik jetop gerwa la ngi abrang go to masala.
Da nyambar ya se di ngaso pena tata di madoba gom se ji mewe nge de shigi yala madoba dira on chonju ngona ko madoba gom se tere ba ari nyamya se dinge de tonam tongni yakbi kabrela
las
tata ka se gom se dinge de ko jithau de matang ba pena tikba chungi chachang de gongku yora ta
now
ti jine gongku yore tela soba yore yang chonju khurang na lo la ya samden leu no la pe tene mangbo song yore ta jinge sadu la soba tene mangbo song yore pe ta de jine gom ya tes.
Okay. So then it says in the post meditation, and I just clarified with Khen Rinpoche what it means by post meditation here, because he's explaining it kind of as its own meditation. And he was saying that the first, when you meditate on the body as space-like, that's like the meditation on the ultimate reality or the emptiness reality of the body. And this is on the more of it is. Literally use the word post meditation, but it is its own kind of meditation when you have these contemplations or meditations on the impurity of the body. So just generally in terms of our own conventional worldly conventions, we do believe in things being clean and dirty. And these things that we do generally consider to be dirty substances like urine and feces and blood and all these things, we don't normally think about them as part of our body, but they're there whether we like it or not. And so it's a practice, this talked about very extensively in the Way of the Bodhisattva as well, in the meditative concentration chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva. There's a whole section on meditating on the impurity of the body. And so that's what's meant here, is that this is the kind of meditation on like the conventional reality of the body.
Oh, let's say, this Anita Dinima Sorvalandona. At Sorva Deyan, Tenesondo, Nyamya de Maki Patan, Jitab de Gang Sorian, Dungata, Chiching the Nimbo Mepase, Nyamya de Kiva Mepatan. Jitab de Nika said, Sora de Sotamji, don't have a tongue, Nimbo Mebasage, but do not in this song.
And then when we move on to the application of mindfulness on the feelings, then the Drumtadzu Giravala.
Oh, really?
Then the Longchen Rabjam's the Treasury, the Precious Treasury of Philosophical Systems says that for feelings in the main practice or the meditative equipoise, you meditate on the birthlessness of feelings or the unarising of feelings, the birthlessness of feelings. And in the post meditation or in the conventional aspect, then you meditate on or you understand all feelings to be an aspect of suffering and to be without any essence.
Tony is here. Tony in be Jensen de Karichakor said, Ane Penangaso Sorva said, Dingende, Jiche Mambu, Sopi Guni, Taki Paka said, Yayavanda, but Nangyavachi Remato, Muni Sorva said, De, Sada, Nanda, Pa, Kala Tachitane, as Ratwi or Made, Tichundu, Di Marabitul Yapatela said.
And so when it says that in the meditative equipoise that the feelings are unborn or birthless, what that means is that they're empty. And so what does it mean for them to be emptiness? It is that that a feeling is only something that we impute or something which arises or appears due to the coming together of many causes and conditions, and is not something which independently exists. No matter where we look, when we examine inside ourselves, outside ourselves, in the intermediary joining of outside and inside, we never find, when we examine, we never find an individual, singular, solid feeling. And so when we rest in that state of not finding, that is the equipoise, or the resting on mindfulness, or the application of mindfulness on feeling.
Ani yang ti jithab de ta do nga ba se undukala ta nga so be chi dungan de la dungan ge dungan jibi dungan chaban de je ge dungan se som ta ma ya gi yore te che undu ta dungan de nga so hapo de te re ani de mayin ba de so tham che nga so ta ta chi chowa te se deva ta nang de na yang kon jon ro ji ge deva de la dungan jirons cha so wa de la dungan ge dungan yang na khorang ge yi khorang te pe dungan che jen da wo ji cha de na ani chaban de ji dungan se ka chen di no la mandi ba chi aso sem ge no ya yo ma ta ko chowa ina di no la mandi ba ji ya jo ma te in bi jin sen ge ani na ji thab de chowa de so dong wa se de song ko.
And then it says that in the post-meditative, or the conventional side, then you recognize that all feelings are suffering. And so when we talk about suffering, we always talk about three types of suffering: the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and the suffering of all-pervasive conditionality, or conditioned existence. And so suffering of suffering is the obvious kind of suffering that we all experience. The suffering of change and is more like something that, even though it might in the immediate sense appear to us to be something pleasant, the fact that it can stop being happy, that it can change into something suffering, is the suffering of change. And then the third type of suffering, the suffering of all pervasive conditionality, means that the ground upon which that feeling is arising, that where that feeling is grounded in itself, is a cause of suffering. That no matter what it is, it's going to ultimately lead to suffering, is the suffering of all pervasive conditionality. So no matter what type of feeling we're having, ultimately it doesn't go beyond, or it is never outside the boundaries of these three types of suffering. So that's why it says in the post-meditation, or as the conventional understanding, that you should see that all feelings are suffering.
Chaban de jeji dunga se de dene ji jebata gawata nawan chwata jegan namchi segonanda kachin de yo de se changma de jer dunga ji chadi yore tata ngu se chowa da ji jule je rong ma je rong dende gi thone ya chu yores.
So another thing that we could say generally about this suffering of all pervasive conditionality is that as long as you're still within the realm of these experiences of birth, aging, sickness, and death, or the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, then whether you're having a manifest feeling of suffering or not, you're still in an experience of suffering, or in a realm of suffering.
And the dong pe nga so di chi chora da de do se dingen de ani ka se de dunga chur ju ba la te ni ani deva se ni ya yo song tadanga so di lobe ayan debak dere karse di pe na ngala kangwi kanga chi ngal lab de dikala top se chawa jin zindu de sa chelen zindu de lamson dewa chi che yorda chawa ya sa chen zindu ya chekdo de ko dunga nyang ge yore ya lamson tramo chi no phatin zindu de lamson dewa chi chonang chi che yore ta de chang su dunga che ju ba la dewa se chi. And
another thing that is mentioned by the great master Aryadeva is that that even the things that we consider to be happiness or comfort are actually just an alleviation of suffering. So for example, if we are really cold and then we're able to enter into some space that's really warm, we feel like, oh man, that's happiness, or that's really pleasurable, but it's actually just an alleviation of suffering that we refer to as happiness. And similarly, if we're really hot and then we can go into somewhere cool, then we feel happy, but it's actually just the fact that we escaped from hot that we feel happy that we're cold.
No, let's say, and chick didn't they jail some no pansona, Muni chick deva the dunga singing the puggy chick trap the hand of that. Nilo Tatupa the yoding is on the Muni Mare, Kachin chick, Juajin, Chimbala, tensioning us so deducted, say, tender was some tender with Chando here, mother Muni, Dale mother, but in us Hakores.
And so even just thinking about this topic or this subject that I just mentioned here, we can see that if you really examine the ultimate nature, these ideas of happiness and suffering are not something which ultimately or truly exist, but they're really just reliant upon each other, that like through a changing of one, we think that now we're in the other and vice versa and so forth. But really on a deeper level, neither of them truly exist.
Let's say, and that digging us so carreta, Lutemba Yatam, so what Temba Yatita, Dubanda with it, that is once.
And so that was just a little bit of a summation or a brief summary that we just went through of the application of mindfulness on the body and on feeling.
Anita, same Tembanya Yanjo de young, the Garan Sondo, Nyam Yad, Ranging Tombata, Jitab de Manga la Mniba Goms.
Magala Mene.
Oh, ore, Ngakwa Mebatan, Nipa Meba.
That's it. And so then on to the mindful application of, or application of mindfulness on the mind, then the precious treasury of philosophical systems again says that in the meditative equipoise, you meditate on mind as being naturally or inherently empty. And in the post-meditation or conventional, that mind neither ceases nor abides.
Anita, stem sedu, that you don't return that Nasota, Lila Hako de Gidua. That same sound the Zobotin, da, Ben and Megan Namki, Navin Namki, Nine Namki, Jay Namki, Lugin Namki, Yegin Namki say, that theatre the solar, that Namki took Jay Yana, that took Ro Yana, Kachin, theatre the solar Jagu race.
And so I think that, body and feeling are pretty easy for us to understand, but when we talk about mind, then what we're talking about is, for example, like our eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, like physical consciousness, mental consciousness. So those are the 6 consciousnesses. Alternately, we can talk about 8 consciousnesses and so forth, but those are what we refer to as mind.
That also make zone tone their data, making a his zone tone or say that now be taking your Nava Draco their day, the name Casere, Navinam he take it up, Draco or say.
It's like, for example, the Buddhists, we say that when you see a form, you're seeing that with your eye consciousness. And when you hear a sound, you're hearing that with your ear consciousness.
Namki Tsogji, Zosim, that theatre de Sola, the name Nyam Yad Ranging Tomba, Sound, that copet, Kavala, you make Tola. I think also say Judge Tangsuna, same setting and did Narang Zuwot, Nang, Pa, Sum. Then this genetic uni party, Tajet Tandona, and a Pagila, Nimbo Wochi, Ratu Maris.
And so when it says that the mind in the meditative equipoise, the main practice, you see the mind as being inherently empty, what that means is that you examine to try and find whether this mind exists or not. And when you look for this mind, you look at it in your body, like inside, outside, in the intermediary space. And when you really examine in that way, you never find any, essentially existing mind, and you won't find such a thing.
Not so. That in this song that Gaseritella da Ranging Tomba, Naso Tomba do Pazuya Maipa, Ranging getting Gaseri, Niepa the Trading Egila. Ani Niepa the Travi turn Tombatella, Ani Tony turn Tom, dig to the Tremba Yaun the Ga, Ani turn them the Ani same Temanya Yabache.
And so then when we say inherently or naturally empty, what that means is that we didn't make it empty. It is inherently empty. It's naturally empty. And so it's naturally not something, or inherently not something which you can find. When you try and examine it, you'll never find it because it's inherently empty. And so when you see that reality and you rest upon that or apply your mindfulness in the seeing of that reality, that's what's referred to then as the application of mindfulness of mind.
Anita jitop data the na jini down the galata naso pe sem deso tamchita kana yang atukuyo mare ko sharara mege zotong nabi draco reba o tindis jini teni kasi so sem deso leka tara ra jinudu naso ngakpa mebare dan 통바 menayan ko ngakpa mebigi teni kasi sem jiges.
And so then in that post-meditative or conventional sense, saying that mind doesn't cease or has no cessation, it means that even if we try and block our mind, we can't. Like our eyes are going to continue seeing sounds, our ears are going to keep hearing, our eyes are going to keep seeing forms, our ears are going to keep hearing sounds. Our primary consciousnesses will keep functioning, even if we try to not think or try to stop our mind, it continues to function.
And this ye tipano de sola peti semde mataba sigido. Ko uni tani mataba de noni tape ten chehi to what ko semde de koro ngado keyboard with they say on so dunga chasarda. Ane tended over the naso semde kejela gachuchu, dochuchu, jorchuchu, mochuchu, tape chatsangi dua da copedi, teaching this sem tabase.
So, bring this back to how this is joining in the Bodhisattva approach with the foundational vehicle or Hinayana Theravada type of approach, then, they primarily will meditate on impermanence. And so the mind is one of the best, objects to focus on for impermanence because it is so changeable. In the morning we can feel happy and by the afternoon we're feeling upset. And just moment to moment, our mind is very easily changeable, changing from happiness to suffering to dullness and so forth. Our mind is, moment to moment changing.
Let's say, that take it so same.
And so that is the application of mindfulness in mind. And then the fourth, the application of mindfulness on phenomena.
Anita dela kasere yang de sondu nyam yade nyamba nida jitap de jimi pe je ta jimi pe la so bagoni gongure song.
And so then in the root text again, the precious treasury of philosophical systems, it says that in the meditative equipoise you meditate on phenomena as equanimity, and in the post meditation you meditate on phenomena as being like the 8 examples of illusions.
Ani that the Karasongo said, Nyamya the Nyambani said, Pena Nyamya the Karichin Nyabani Charles and Pena Nala tende Yoba de Ta Pena Naso de Cape Joe just tell I am te yore. Nila te you do any Chenabadana di Nye Dengim Samalayam, that te yoreta. Kiparengas.
Kariorela, Nigosuma.
Ta Casereta, Nyamba Nisegumareta, Turn Tambalan, Kia Madapachi.
Bless.
Kia Madapagata, Ranging more Madapati, Ta Nala Yore, Chela Yore. Chinaba Yang Sola Yore, De La Sopes Naso, Saina, Saint Sama, Kiparevas.
Bless. And so then what it means to say that in the meditative equipoise, you meditate on the equanimity of all phenomena. It means that true nature, that nature of being not inherently established as anything whatsoever, meaning that emptiness reality. It's like, if I have that nature myself, then Justin, our translator, also has that reality. And if the two of us have that reality, then that is also the reality of all of you out there listening and of everyone else. So that is the equanimity of the nature of phenomena.
Ani tendo woda sanji layang jibare, sanjo simbalayang jibare, mado sanji ge tongni de yembaji, sanjo simbala yembaji, ngasola teli duwanda wu yembaji tende yo mares jibare.
So it's the same reality for the Buddha, for the Bodhisattvas, It's not as if that there's some different nature of emptiness for the Buddhas and different for the Bodhisattvas, and somehow our nature or our true nature of emptiness is somehow worse or lesser than the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but it is equanimity. It is a equality amongst us all.
And there is some that same young to hear that is a couple of catching dot this one. That same so same mind be same young as I'm not on it. They mind bang as take jing and dimajiba pen so main singing the one that I took to the Yomarivellata. Na tata di. Theatre las over town, JD, Muni, Chick Tomba Nigi, Tulasano Tansona, Chickba Chickande, Kova the Yangdi. You said so much Chickbare that the Niti Laviana Paco de Cesare.
No. And so it's not just for us like beings, it's also that equality is for us, that equality is for our minds, for our what we refer to as primary states of mind, what we refer to also as mental factors. They all have this same equanimity nature of emptiness, and that's there's a more of these. There's something called non-associated compositional factors. Anyway, like names and time and dates and things like that. This is a complicated philosophical subject. Anyway, there are other things that exist that are neither form nor consciousness. So the point is that the nature of all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are all equal. They are all this great equality or equanimity, all having the equal nature of emptiness.
That Jitab that Jamalas would pay some daughter. Jitab de co J. Jen, Jitin, Lanky the Tsupaina. Annie, co Tamchi Tenedita, Nangrong Red, the Matsang Major Telan, Ribukang Duperjos. Jitin took Sumbaina, and Ansota, Kasi Tamchi Nang Digido, and it Jimala Tegarare, co Jitin Sundi. Nangre, Matsuna, Nangayo Marva, Nasoya Tenda, Jichen Suputobiguni, then Gatsin Nama Mangabaretua.
And so then when it says in the post-meditative or conventional sense, then that we see all things or all phenomena as being like an illusion, and these other examples like an illusion. And so the point of that is that any phenomena exists only when you have a cause and then the supportive conditions, and they come together. And when those come together, then that thing, whatever it is, that phenomena can appear. And so there's a quote from some scripture that says that when the causes and conditions are fully complete, then no one could stop the result from happening. So once all those causes and conditions are in place, then everything can appear, just like an illusion done by a magician or a conjurer. When all of the causes and conditions for their illusion are in place, then that illusion can appear. And in the same way, any phenomena, for it to appear, all the correct causes and conditions have to come together, and without those, they can't appear.
Well, let's say, and it does take the negative, Tremba never Yapa say data, do city and Chenabal train to sit Tibama Tambai.
And so that's just a brief, a quick summation of the 4 applications of mindfulness that I presented just in accordance with the brief time that we have today.
That did number yet the Dutch Charanda is that Tango wrap up in the Lundrachila make it. And a daily Tawatane, Gazette Sorwaki, same key, and a Gazette. Same young las about that, changing non dimensive chulas, that Yambag chulas, both in this Jenny Yore, and it takes a young Tara young Ray, then a young Marty subject of it and Rohu or Kachin dot disuna, then this Jenny Gomeres.
And so another thing to think about is that just generally speaking, that these 4 are presented in a sequence of starting more coarse and getting more and more subtle. So first, our body is a very coarse, very obvious or coarse phenomena that we can examine very easily. Then in a more subtle level, we move to our feelings, and even more subtle than that is our mind. And even more subtle than that is this topic of phenomena, which encompasses mental factors and all of these other aspects that we discussed. So it becomes more and more subtle and also more and more profound.
nyen tu do chi bai no ane zo da demba yela ma ta cha do yore ta demba ye ore ta ti pe mang ta do sare ta ore ta de chi song na de nyen tu na ta pe ko di den ye ta di chi ni ma koron ko de yore den ye ta de so hi ba je ane tini ma gomji so da jire ta nga so tike ta de jine ta demba ni no du na digre ko tangam ji demba ta kunjob ji demba ni no du na ya ta kon dikhi ores.
And so just generally speaking, then in the Shravaka and Pratyekabuddha path, or the path of the Theravada approach, then they base their presentation, their path, and their practice on the four truths, and then meditate on that. And in the Mahayana tradition, then that's all contained or gathered within the presentation of the true truths, so the conventional truth and the ultimate truth.
That the noning also tata than the teaching that he on the gala, and the teaching that the he the gala teaching ge, and in it tata he banagiri, turn tambig nilo de lu sor sem hug yugat and nilo de tombitoji goni, and it tell a nyabria. Kunzob de digit ne kasir nawa ta manga paketi kunzob de nawa tela korra mata bache digit nilo hibache ane digitula de ne kasir nyambar yase gumare oten thongwache thongthuk de ne nyambar yas doduna.
And then so now we're talking about the Mahayana tradition, that what we're talking from that perspective, and in the Mahayana tradition then we're trying to see the reality of the ultimate truth. So the ultimate truth of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And then when we see those, the reality of those four, then we rest in a meditative equipoise on that vision of that reality. And then anidi kunzob ki chadi nge yapuran chegi sonye de yapuran go tsumasona.
Tati kunzob ki tante thongwa che rawala. Kunzob na de lundo wachena kochi matsang bala subatani ko teson thongbi choji gona o te nagi chini ye tari sosol jawade.
And so then in the same way, the way that I was talking previously, coming from this Longchenpa text, talking about the ultimate and conventional aspects, then we meditate on the ultimate in the way I just described by examining and seeing the ultimate reality of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And then we have those four coinciding aspects of conventional reality. So we want to see the conventional truth or the conventional situation of those four things as well, with the body being impure and so that's.
And they on Chitanga de Yams Landong Theatre so Renzing Jimmeling the Yunten Zerg Nanola and it Tomer Chik Nasotata di Semcheni zone. Yare Jamro the Semchela Sopa. Then this Jenny and the Marcas at the Yamachin Rotonchi. Song Yore and it then I in jar and then Jolo Moment jet. Ravala or Tati Ngola Jamdo Semchi.
No.
Muyela and the Casere Tata di Nya Jola the Nikas Moment Jibachini Lam Tsangla Manor Bachinroya. In this.
And for the practice of this, then in Rigdzin Jingme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities, then the entire stages of practice are outlined there, where you begin with the application of, or the beginning, the introduction of the practice, where you join the practice by taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. And then for the main body of the practice, you meditate on these four applications of mindfulness, and then conclude with the dedications and aspirations. So that entire, perfect and unerring path is described in Jigme Lingpa's text.
Naze, ane yang tadan kembo yenden jam soge, teni yenden zogen drewagen nalo la, teni tichen tingmen ge cheper, teni som la soba yado de la.
And then in Khenpo Yönting Gyatso's commentary to the Treasury of Precious Qualities, then he gives three distinctions between the Hinayana and Mahayana approaches.
Tadela mikpa namba guba se mikpi cheper nambi cheper gubi cheper and song somtama yash.
So he talks about a difference of the object, a difference of the way you view those objects, and a difference of the purpose of those practices.
And it did this on the ye typical sala, then in the Ranglula so Miki song yado. Then taking a couple of ranging lutamchi, like Mickey, Taka, the Sorala, so but by Yani, then this Yeni, Cheperchi, maybe Cheper than the Yasha.
So the difference of the objects that he presents is that in the foundational vehicle, the foundational teachings, then you only are told to look at your own body, your own feelings, your own mind, and so forth. Whereas in the Bodhisattva teachings, the Mahayana teachings, then you look at yourself, your own body and the bodies of everyone else, your own feelings and the feelings of everyone else, and so forth. So it's not just about you.
Ani da nambi cheper de ani ye typical sala mchang subata chancho simbical sala so tongni la subata de yasha.
And then the thing that you're trying to understand about that object, or the way that you're meditating on that object, is that in the foundational teachings, you're just trying to see like the impurity of the body in the main practice, whereas in the Bodhisattva practice, the Mahayana practice, you're trying to see the emptiness of the body, the emptiness of the feelings, the mind, and so forth.
Ta kachen jik maso ta namba de pena zo jik ta kasiri no pena jik ndo cha shedang tamogla soba tendre ta ngaso yore piketa de so nyembo reba kachen dig nyembo de toni ge zoto ko na ndra matsangbar mikti ko ni zoto ko na ndra kachen teta de gongore ma to yang jik nga chi de mare nga di ye thiba mare nga di thikhen de nga thikhen mare la soba ta de se yo mare so ge kare nyembo din ro duna de ta de chi gomna degrees.
And when we talk about those, then ultimately what we're talking about is that the way that you imagine, or the way that you try to understand or view the body, mind, feelings, and so forth, those are all antidotes to our attachment, aversion, ignorance. And so, if emptiness works for you, if it serves as an antidote, as a way to counter your afflictive thoughts and emotions, then you can use that. But if it's actually more effective for you to meditate on the impurity of the body to overcome your attachment to the body and so forth, then you should do that. And it's not a matter of, oh no, I'm not a Hinayana practitioner, I'm a Mahayana practitioner, so I have to meditate on emptiness. That's not the case. It's whichever one is actually effective for you as an antidote to your own afflictions is the one that you should use.
And da gubi cheper de yasha. Da gubi cheper de and ye typical sala, tadanga so sake lu, de part and de can draviche de la bombiose. And it teaching kausala tane draya some tankme, mandrava some tankme, and a caseritic sangia che de la bombiose, and the song yandoma.
And then the difference in the purpose of the practice is that in the foundational teachings, I keep using, we have been switching to using the word foundational teachings to avoid the term Hinayana, and also Theravada is very specific to one particular lineage. So it's also not a great term. Hinayana is kind of a condescending kind of term. So we keep using the word foundational teachings. So I hope that's not confusing everyone out there. So when I say foundational teachings, I'm talking about what is referred to in the Mahayana text as the Hinayana. And so Khen Rinpoche uses the word foundational teachings a lot as well, foundational vehicle. So anyway, the difference in the purposes is that the foundational vehicle, the purpose of their path is to separate from this contaminated body. And in the Mahayana approach, there's not an issue of separating or not separating. The purpose is Buddhahood.
Dodra was Dibaina, and ye Tipainandra, Sancho Simbainandra, Kachen, the Tremba never yapa gombani zonte, and solam the jolam, the tonam, the gomlam, the animal bilam, the yetateso, then rebiting the dirt of your race.
And so to summarize, whether you're practicing from the perspective or from the path of the foundational vehicle or the Mahayana vehicle, you're going to start with the practices, the meditations on the 4 applications of mindfulness, and proceed through the paths of accumulation, joining, seeing, training, and no more training.
Maduji any teaching get so join Tongon Dre Tabla, young ye typical drum tapse at the Yoma, ye typical journey, Drakamba Tungape, Mambore. Chain Kausala, they Gombala Tanchini, Sujum ya drone a pe mambore, then that's home, so London, Timmy Sodigoni, they done Timin Rivere,
And so it's also not a matter of that, just because someone on the Theravada path goes through their path, it doesn't mean that they're not going to also make it through the paths of accumulation, joining, seeing, training, and no more training, and so forth. Each path or each vehicle of practice, each spiritual approach has its own paths and its own results that you gain from those paths. So there is what we call a path of joining, accumulation, seeing, and so forth from the foundational vehicle, and the same names get applied to different levels of practice in the Mahayana teachings. So I've already talked up here for an hour and 16 minutes, and I think you guys are probably getting tired of me. And so to wrap things up, what I talked about today is, is these 4 applications of mindfulness in the context of my greater presentation, where my goal is that I want to give brief summaries of all of these subsections of the 37 Factors of Enlightenment. So we got started with that today. And I also talked a bit about the path of accumulation. And then the primary thing that we talked about today was the 4 applications of mindfulness, though. And then I briefly talked about the way of meditating on these 4 from the perspective of the precious treasury of philosophical systems.
And digging joke the balata, Chetangeti, Tipa Chechung, Tamchila, Ane, the Trembanya Yapa yet the Gomji Yorela, Tedan Tibi, Dribian Tabi Yorese, and then Dribu to Lahi.
And then I talked at the end here about the results that no matter which perspective you're coming from, whether that is from the Theravada or the foundational vehicle or the Mahayana vehicle, you can practice these 4 applications of mindfulness, and you will attain a result which accords with the path of your practice. And so now I've completed that.
Anita Dwalang in Jogla Tarong the Tsik Matnena, and the Solum La Yang, the Ne Chong Rain Chimbos in some ejore. Dig Nani Netada de He de and Solum Chung La Solum Chung Picanza take the Gomja Tigresila.
And so I want to add one more thing at the end here, coming back to this discussion of the path of accumulation, is that we can also divide, the path of accumulation is also divided into what we call the lower or the smaller path of accumulation, the middle path of accumulation, and the greater path of accumulation. And everything that we talked about today is coming from the perspective of the practices of a being on the lesser or the lower path of accumulation.
Ani that dini jima ani di solum ringbo la ani kargongure sage yang ite hiongres.
And then next time I'm going to talk about what one would meditate on the middle path or the middling path of accumulation.
Oh, let's say any that ring dana yagi.
All right, so I'm going to leave it here today.
Ani danga so that ring ki nga tada di trabaku yagi tisudi te siji rasa mare. Ani jima tani chenaba shonda tapsona ani jima nge debala land out the japchu.
So I don't really have time today to take questions, but if you have questions, keep them in mind. And next time we come next month, I will make some time and answer your questions.
Oh, let's say any tamadela tang ho manachi yagi.
And so now here at the end, I'm going to recite some dedications and aspirations.
So nom de tamche zigba ni tomna nyembe dana hamze kega namche walup Tibin solen show gewan de jewo sunami kunye topper shows tangi gala seje tamche te denedi chuko the zuko gutene kunye topper shows in the mana tabiosera.
So my prayer that I was just making is may all beings attain the Dharmakaya and the form bodies, the two types of Buddha bodies.
And that you guys too.
You guys should do that also. Yeah.
Oh, let's say Anita Zimjanango.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Everyone, good night. Let's say Justin Atuchena.
That's good night.